I remember watching a Sage's Reign video on the character Cassandra Cain, and being so enamored by the idea of the character that along with a revived interest in Batman stuff in general, I decided to start tracking down certain Batman books. That was half a year ago. This is how I got into the medium. I haven't gotten around to even half of what I purchased, but I have at least gotten through some of the ones I was interested in the most. This is where we get to It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth, a book I often saw advertised outside one of the comic shops I go to. After several failed attempts to find it, I stumbled upon the only remaining copy the store had and nabbed it for an eventual family car ride to a different city. I knew the book would be autobiographical and contain certain aspects of depression and suicide, but I had no idea that this would be the work I fell in love with most. It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth is more or less the musings of British cartoonist Zoe Thorogood as she plows through 6 months of her life involving conventions, romance, and a trip to America. Her attempts to see what comes out of it get intertwined with several anecdotes about her life prior, and how she had been struggling with suicidal depression since adolescence, and several other moments of meta-commentary with various representations of herself. Her narrations, as well as each individual caricature of her personality, poke at both the concept and current progress of her work, as well as various aspects of her past and present life before eventually, Zoe settles on a conclusion about her experiences. This book is a spectacular tonal balancing act, keenly aware of what it is and could fall into, while always remaining sincere about what it's trying to convey. It's basically what a lot of creators feel, especially nowadays. A lot of meta-commentary in media within the past decade or so tends to feel cynical, bitter, and sometimes just try hard. Just look at the Velma trailer and you'll immediately feel a sense of fatigue if you care about any kind of sincerity in a work. Zoe Thorogood's comic is more than aware of its position as an autobiographical work, an inherently masturbatory book that takes artistic license with the author's serial navel-gazing. It addresses this idea constantly, while laughing it off and going right back to being sincere and vulnerable. Nowhere is this more obvious than when Zoe gets done expressing her views on art only to get incredibly smarmy with a girl who asks her if it's possible to suck her own dick any harder by threatening to draw her cross-eyed in the next panel and confirming that, yes it is. The Zoe Thorogood of her own book is both its protagonist and god, weaponizing the very nature of how comics depict things to shut up the jabs her other selves take at her visual metaphors. Her art style changes constantly to convey every single emotion and create a distinction between every relevant character. The colors shift between pages to display things like how she feels when strutting down London to the tune of Don't Stop Me Now, after having her portfolio passed around and accepted by some industry folks in the Image Comics creator panel. The characters consist of anthropomorphic animal depictions of specific friends and love interests, simplistic caricatures of humans, a ghastly demonic beast of depression and ideation, and her more usual art style for almost everyone else, among other things. Hell, she isn't even afraid to put photorealistic images in, shift how you're supposed to read certain panels, or dictate which panels in a page are allowed to have color or even get her normal art style. Full page panels can utterly eschew how they're normally meant to be read, by going in a circular formation for fuck's sake. There's no limit to how Zoe can contort her own comic, as the deviations seem boundless and are always calculated to heighten every frenzied, flurried emotion she wishes to convey. It's never so overstimulating or overplayed that it becomes white noise, partially because of the sheer variety of what she gets away with. It's also hard to be exhausted when at all times, the book is so pretty. Especially the full-page panels and double-page spreads. And even in other comics such as Batman Black Mirror or Do a Powerbomb, it tends to only hit me like once or twice. It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth floors me constantly with jaw-dropping page-turn moments. One of the Image Comics panel members during a dinner meetup may have called her the future of comics as a sort of, your job will result in tons of people expecting things from you newbie kinda way. But with such immense craftsmanship on display, Zoe has honestly earned the right to humor it, facetiously or otherwise. Even with its disarming and self-aware irreverence, the book can still be excruciatingly heavy, with some of the aforementioned page turns being alarming or even sobering. This is a book about a person struggling with suicidal depression for a decade after all. I've consumed plenty of works dealing with ideation and self-loathing back in my college years, especially in terms of music. Hell, for God's sakes, I'm an Evangelion fan. That should speak for itself. So yeah, this stuff speaks to me and comforts me even to this day when I'm already past that point in my mental health and outlook. Even still, It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth managed to whisper to me in ways nothing else had, eliciting things about my experience that I never heard anywhere else. Nowheres is more apparent that when Zoe showcased how her ideation impacted how she interacts with her parents. The idea of trying not to make the people who raised you worry, because you know they helped get you to where you are, and you know that they've gone through a lot to do so. That part of the book might have actually hurt me the most. I know it can be exhausting to hear the same descriptor for a work being parroted over and over by myriads of fans, but well, relatable is the word of the day when it comes to this book, isn't it? It speaks to my experience with self-loathing in ways I had never encountered before, while also adding its perspective on the creative experience. Art exists partly to entertain people, and partly to connect with them, convey things to them that they can internalize, take with them, and pair next to their own experiences. Of course, thanks to differing preferences and senses of media literacy, among other things, wires will inevitably be crossed for someone, and sometimes even the creator themselves. However, that's just the fact of life, even outside of art. Some audiences are impatient, arrogant even. So are creatives to varying extents, given that we're all people at the end of the day. Hell, if we don't at least mildly entertain the idea that you're hot shit as an even remotely successful creator in any field really, then what the hell are you even doing? Let's be honest, if you're a creative, especially a young fucking YouTuber in their 20s or some shit, you are or were a miserable, irreverent, sometimes barely tolerable, pretentious piece of shit. I still am, minus the sad parts sorta now. As such, I feel seen, even targeted by this book. And anyone and everyone in my field who has the stomach for it should honestly read it, even if it will say some things that perhaps you may not want to hear. It's hard not to feel like human connection is soul-grindingly difficult, even with those you consider friends. It often feels like something's missing, even with a lot of the people around you. Sometimes people just don't get you, or you don't get them, and therefore think they don't even want to try to get you. It's easy and sometimes even a little cathartic to get lost in your own wallowing. Stewing in your own misery does help kill the time, though it'll also help you kill yourself if you're not careful. Depression is an overwhelming grayness or blueness, I find, if not a full-on void, depending on the day. Perhaps that's another reason why much of this book doesn't even have color, and why it feels like a veritable bitch slap every time a panel gets a splash of it. Ideation is bleak, raw, intense, and all-consuming. It sometimes takes a powerful force to help you move away from it, even if the process is gradual and unique to everyone's situations and nuances. The book may end in color, but it's largely black and white. Perhaps only Zoe can say if she's confidently past that now, or at least past the worst of it now, if the genuinely uplifting ending is anything to go by. Even with all of its self-aware insecurities, It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth is wholly sincere. It's still incredibly frank, like that one friend who loves joking around with you, but is absolutely prepared to wax about the heavy shit with you at the end of the night. If you're not prepared, it will hurt you. However, there's always levity around the corner, and there are some lovely takeaways from it outside of just the absurd levels of craftsmanship the meta-narrative comic incorporates. You could chalk it up to my lack of experience with the medium if you'd like, but this book feels like it destroys the boundaries of comics and makes the absolute most out of the medium, all while tearing my heart out and plopping it back in, repeatedly. I've only read like 10 comics so far, and therefore only a handful of the greats like Do a Power Bomb, Whatever Happened to the Cape Crusader, Harleen, or The Killing Joke. However, from what I've read, I can safely say that It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth stands proudly among them, and I'm eagerly awaiting what Zoe Thorogood has in store for us next. Hell, I've been looking for previous works she drew and or wrote, like Rain, which I have a copy of now, and The Impending Blindness of Billy Scott, the latter of which I definitely want to read so I can go back to this book in the way it incorporates Zoe's experience regarding the creation of that one. There's just so much to this book that had me at admittedly choking up several times. I have an immense appreciation for vulnerable works that can really engage with their audience in a way that sees them in their darkest moments regarding themselves. I think my favorite way that Zoe does that in this book is something she does about 1/4 of the way into it, where she invites the reader to tell their own story. I certainly have one to tell, but I'll do so at a later date, and in a completely different context. However, the fact that the reader is encouraged to tell their story of ideation and depression in the middle of Zoe's story, the fact that you get a pair of pages to share your experience with her and personalize your own copy, just the level of warmth and kindness from someone who does that, from someone who just gets it, makes me incredibly happy. To think, barely 2 years older than I was at the time of her making this comic last year, Zoe Thorogood has made a monumental work within her medium and industry, while the best I can do at age 22 is talk and write about it and other pieces of media on a YouTube channel nobody watches. We all start somewhere and learn how to navel-gaze and self-deprecate, don't we? Learning how to turn that off is the hard part. Still, as I was saying, the invitation to let us dedicate a corner of the book to ourselves is indicative of how the book was made to connect with and help us. Even if I can't take her or the comic up on their offer, the sentiment got to me regardless, and even writing about it had me fighting back tears. Through her work, Zoe has made an impact on me, and I hope this video allows you to seek out the experience this book will leave you with. I'd like to think that's what would make her happiest regarding this wonderful comic, knowing that upon laying her vulnerabilities and sensibilities bare, that we'd take them with us and apply to our own lives. You always hear that all the best artists are miserable, that their greatest works came from when they were in emotional turmoil, and that a lot of people ended up having worse output sometime after healing. That just reinforces the idea that being or having been a miserable sad sack who hates himself about as much or more than everyone else hates them is borderline mandatory as an artist. As long as we can get out of that, or at least learn to combat it, we should be fine though, right? After all, while it is lonely at the center of the earth, just by letting someone and their story in and intertwining that with our own, perhaps Earth's core isn't so desolate after all. Perhaps neither are we.